Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Um, I'm Josh with American Known Productions, and um, so I got my sleep knocked out at just after 10 a.m. and then got up around 4, something like that. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, something like that. Maybe even 5. I don't know. But at least I got at least 6. I have a couple things for you to look at this evening before we get back into Atomic Heart, because I really fucking like that game. It's moving along nice and briskly. The enemies are hard enough to where, I have to be careful, but I'm strong enough to where I can confidently at least fight them. And it's fun, and it's visually fucking stunning, and the soundtrack is really fucking nice too. So yeah. I have tonight's activity. Yeah. So first up, we're gonna look at exploring dark children's fantasy films from the 80's by Uncultured, and then we're gonna look at Wayfinder, which is a new MMO coming out at some point from Force Gaming, or not from him, but it's a video by Force Gaming. And after that, we'll jump right into Atomic Heart. I would very much like to get my stream done early tonight so I can get on a decent schedule for sleep. And if it works out correctly, I might even be able to stream a little bit tomorrow when I get up before I have to go to work. Yeah. So, 1 second, guys. So, the guy never cleans the inside of this. Well, it's whatever. It's not my piece. It's whatever. He does clean it, actually. So. That whole overnight session in the morning stuff was kind of brutal. I won't lie. I mean, I could replicate I could do it again. It's not. It just is what it is. But I don't think I want to be honest. And I think I need to get on a more regular schedule. Maybe get up with you guys earlier in the day on my weekends. I still want to do late night streaming because I feel like that's my relaxing time. It's when everybody's knocked out for the most part, and I can do what I want. this price tag off my grinder. Oh, and my salesman instincts just kicked in there for a second. So if you are looking for a grinder, we have grinders like these, starting at $9.99. 4-chamber, very nice and smooth. They're like sharp stones, but tiny. Pretty good. I don't know if he's still on, but my buddy Chan is also streaming or he was playing some kind of F1 game. Okay, so he's off now. Okay. I don't really need. Where'd it go? There we go. Sorry, just getting some music. Yeah, there we go. In lieu of doing a dab at this particular moment, because we're going to be watching some stuff first before we get into the game. I'm going to smoke a bowl instead of a dab. It's kind of weird that it's fairly okay for people to get drunk on stream or whatever, and this is mostly still taboo for. Well, I mean, I guess it's different for streaming, but it's part of why I like to stream at night too, so I don't have to worry about underage viewers, like randomly running into my content. Although I don't, this isn't like a huge part of my my shtick. Like I am a smoker, and I do work at a smoke shop, so it's part of who I am. I don't try to hide that shit. I don't look down on people who drink. I enjoy a good Guinness every once in a while, and I do like to drink with people that I enjoy drinking with on occasion. But I'm more of a smoker. Always have been. Like over everything else. Like I don't. enlightening and entertaining as psychedelics can be, it's not something that I like actively seek out all the time. Like, I can drum up psychedelic shit in my own brain without any help. Like, I can close my eyes and fucking sit in the dark, and I'll get fucking a light pattern show that I can, make any shapes my fucking brain can conjure out of those fucking little impulses I want. Same thing. Hello? Excuse me. I said it's you. Okay. I just want to know who it was. Alright, so I don't have to deal with the timer. Milk dragon jar. Can you see that? Doom, 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 doom. Where the fuck did I have this sitting at? Okay, now my bowl is ready. Let's go ahead and... Really good, get some!
Cool.
Alright, so let's go ahead and bring up the TV room. And let's boogie woogie.
It's a beautiful day. All is calm and peaceful in the meadow. Or is it?
The film Watership Down was not released in the 1980s, nor is it really a fantasy movie. The movie focuses on a group of rabbits who decide to leave their warren in search of a safe place to exist after one rabbit, Fiver, has a premonition that their warren is going to be destroyed. It is made explicitly clear in the opening scene of the movie, which recounts the myth of Prince El-Arara, the rabbit was made a divine creation to be eternally hunted and haunted due to the wrongdoings of the rabbit prince. This story adds a major theme to the film, which is the anxiety of everything around you always wanting to kill you. The film illustrates the rabbits trying to outrun their prey, which starts as man, then as other animals, then as each other. Not only does the film feature many mature themes such as this anxiety, dealing with death and loss, the dangers of fascist leadership, and the deterioration of nature by man, but it also features imagery and moments that are dark and disturbing. This film is often cited as one that traumatized many people who watched it as children upon its release. However, what I find to be most fascinating about this film is the fact that it all derived from a children's book. Richard Adams' Watership Down was considered a classic British literary work before being considered a classic film. The book was taught in schools across the UK and beyond, and many remember reading it as children. This is particularly fascinating to me. The idea that a story so mature in tone and dark in nature can be marketed and considered a children's and family movie and book. Children's media has never necessarily strayed away from dark and mature themes, and in modern day, this has become even more normalized. However, when you watch a film like Watership Down, it's hard to imagine the filmmakers ever had children in mind. The animation is faded and semi-realistic, The voice acting, aside from a few minor characters, is comprised of middle-aged British men speaking in normal voices.
And I told you that I would kill you myself.
There are multiple scenes about rabbits dying or being hurt and cut open. A major plot point in the film consists of the rabbits attempting to take down a corrupted, controlling fascist leader, which results in a bloody battle with rabbits ripping each other open. As mentioned, Watership Down is far from the first quote-unquote children's movie to feature dark and disturbing themes and images. However, I find the time of release of this movie, along with its immediate success, to be an interesting benchmark for children's films. We were about to come face to face with the 80s, colliding with what was arguably the most important decade for the fantasy genre, at least when it came to films. Of course, fantasy had been around for generations prior, but it was during the 80s when imagery of knights, dragons, wizards, demons, and magic were at the forefront of film, particularly children's films. So, with children's movies such as Watership Down shaping what the medium of children's films could be, and the boom of the fantasy genre, what we got was a plethora of fantasy films for children which featured dark and disturbing imagery. Imagery that was so profoundly terrifying for children of the era that has been etched in their minds, even today. We live in an age now where information and content for children is infinite, always within reach, and has been shaped and molded by generations of filmmakers, artists, and unfortunately, advertisers. But what if we could try to put ourselves in the mindset of somebody watching one of these films for children in the 80s, when consumption came first and foremost from a television set or a VCR? By taking a deep dive into some of these films, I believe that there's a common theme between them that, while seemingly sinister and evil, is actually very important and profound for children to learn about. That is, teaching children about anxiety and death. Two troubling elements in life that are impossible to escape. Themes that films like Watership Down
Was a traumatic film.
Families even before the 80s. How did these films illustrate anxiety? And how did these films help children become more accustomed to death? Was all of this disturbing imagery simply to shock and scare children? Or was it merely a reflection of the fears and anxieties that many children already have at this age? Are any of these films truly meaningful or profound? This is Anxiety.
That was a good intro. I want to be this good. It's probably going to take me a few years of being on this platform to do, though.
I believe a good jumping point from Watership Down to be the 1982 Rankin and Bass film, The Last Unicorn. The film follows a unicorn who is told that she's the last of her kind. She does not believe this to be true, so she sets out to leave her forest and discover where the other unicorns have gone. This film heavily uses the setting and character tropes of popular fantasy media of the time. However, it's not as dark as other children's films of this time period, both in tone and themes, but also literally in color and style. As with most fantasy films, there is a correlation between dark colors and evil, a common theme we will see played out in almost all of these films. However, this film features beautifully illustrated forests, bright fairies, and a majestic pure white unicorn at the forefront, along with the soundtrack recorded by the band America. However, don't let that fool you. This movie does have some underlying darkness, and while not as intense as others we will discuss, it carries ideas and themes comparable in depth to Watership Down. One of the themes introduced early in the movie is about man's mistreatment of animals. Early in the film, the unicorn comes across a witch named Mommy Fortuna, who makes a living by disguising real animals as mythical creatures.
Just in case anybody wanders in so they can know what's up for the night.
The unicorn can tell these animals aren't mythical at all, revealing the tired old bodies of the animals living beneath the witch's illusions. Mommy Fortuna does face her retribution, though, as the only other living real mythical creature, a harpy, is released and proceeds to attack Mommy Fortuna, eating her alive. At least, that's what I got from this scene. There is a constant strain between the relationship of animals and humans in the film. The crux of the story focuses on the unicorn trying to find the Red Bull, an angry creature controlled by King Haggard, which is what he used to get rid of all the unicorns. It's revealed that King Haggard actually saw a unicorn, something that most humans normally cannot do. The king wanted to recapture the magic feeling his whole life, but he could not. So he got the Red Bull to force all the unicorns out to sea, where they can only be seen when the tide rolls in.
Each time I see the unicorns, my unicorns, it is like that moaning in the woods, and I am truly...
So, once again, this idea that animals only exist for the pure entertainment and enjoyment is visited throughout the film.
Sort of like the same kind of folly with Legend, where Jack wanted to impress what's-her-face and show her a unicorn. And it was a bad idea because We're fucking mortals.
While not violent, the imagery of animal negligence could easily be challenging for children. Themes of anxiety are weaved throughout the film as well, stated in the title itself. The fear of being the last of anything is a depressing thought, and it's what the protagonist's whole story is based upon. The notion of anxiety leads the film to a discussion on identity in some ways, as when the unicorn is turned into a woman to save her from the Red Bull, she slowly starts to forget who and what she was, truly becoming the last of the unicorns. This unraveling of identity is not a huge focus of the film, but the idea of losing the person you are is something older children may have been able to identify with, navigating relationships and puberty. In more recent years, the film has gained a following for being read as an allegory for gender identity. Regardless of how the film is read, growing up is a very transformative stage, and this transformation can be seen literally in the unicorn. This film doesn't focus on death in particular, but it definitely focuses on loss. While in human form, the unicorn falls in love with the prince. However, in a final battle with the Red Bull, she's turned back into a unicorn, and with the help of the others bobbing in the sea, they're able to defeat him. This seems like a happy ending, until the unicorn realizes that she has to go back to her forest as a unicorn. So, although the story is one of joy, of overcoming anxiety, of accepting identity, it ends on a bitter note, as the unicorn realizes that this is how she will live the rest of her immortal life, in regret.
I have been mortal, and some part of me is mortal yet. I'm no longer like the others. For no unicorn was ever born who could regret, but now I do.
While this movie has many overarching positive and bright themes, I believe it's a good place to start as a fantasy film for children of the 80s that also contained darker themes, such as the abuse of other living things, anxiety, identity issues, and loss. While these are dark ideas, they are issues that are important for children to be aware of, as they inevitably become more prevalent throughout life. Navigating these three things while also learning empathy for other living things are all foundational needs.
So letting them hear out real quick.
Look there.
Released
The
same
Secret
year
of
as The
Nim.
Last Unicorn,
that was a
Secret
good
of Nim
film.
tackles some similar themes and subject matter to the former, however, with much darker tone and aesthetic. The film follows a widowed mouse, Miss Brisbane, as she
I'm back in
attempts
the
to save her
corner,
family
so,
and move
like,
to a new home,
periodically
while one
I
of her
gotta do our
children is too
exchange
sick to
anyway.
leave the borough. As one can glean from the synopsis alone, this movie features many mature themes, and the ideas of anxiety and loss are at play in this film as well. As mentioned, the overall aesthetic of the movie is mostly grim and gritty. We meet a great owl who contorts his head, containing glowing yellow eyes. We meet Nicodemus, who, while also being a protagonist, is still an old decrepit rat with the same glowing eyes. It is in the rats, their home and their character traits, that the darkness in the film truly broods, as skulls, faces in the mud, and green, purple, and red lights create the dark 80s fantasy aesthetic that the film is preoccupied with. However, it is in the rats that the darkness succeeds past the aesthetic, but into the themes and story as well. We learn that the strange word in the title, NIM, actually stands for the National Institute of Mental Health, a corporation that has, through the process of laboratory tests and unethical injections, transformed these rats into having knowledge and human emotion. Once again, the idea of animal negligence rears its ugly head, as we see rats become injected with a serum that makes them more human. And more than this, it's through the process of becoming human that these rats are more or less tortured. Tortured by the knowledge of their lifestyle, of their thievery, and anxiety and danger that guides them as rats, but also tortured by the same follies of man, greed, corruption, and violence. As Nicodemus states,
We can no longer live as rats. Know too much.
the idea of rats becoming self-aware itself is not that troubling for children, but paired with the aesthetic and violence expressed near the end of the film, it deserves a mention. While not quite as bloody or disturbing as other films on this list, it's the
Still
second
very
portrait of
violent.
rats, the follies of man, that are at the
Great
forefront of the
movie.
climax of the film. An ambitious rat, Jenner, is hungry for power, and decides to destroy the leader, Nicodemus, as well as anyone that stands in his way. This results in a sword fight with a bit of blood, which compared to other films of this time, is pretty tame. However, I think the more disturbing of these violences is Jenner devising a plan...
That is
to
true, it was
Nicodemus
fairly
crushed to death
tame
by a
for its
cinder block.
time.
While the movie spares us the gory details...
We had a
it's still
really great
abundantly
fucking
clear that
time in the
Nicodemus is
80s,
dead after
guys,
his
like
crushed.
for real, for
While not
real.
bloody, the
I
idea
should,
of the death itself
we're
is
gonna do some
at the
weird
very
history
least
stuff.
heinous. And it's this
It's one of my
disturbing death that
favorite
leads us into another common theme throughout these movies.
channels for
Loss.
like not
While
just
shown
nostalgia,
varying
but
degrees
like
throughout these children's fantasy
looking
films,
at history
clear
and the
through line
patterns
not only
that have
characters
led
having to deal with loss,
to where we are
but having
now.
to learn to move on after this loss. Oftentimes, such is the case for this film, this concerns the death of a guiding force or figure. This can be an extremely impactful idea for children in a multitude of ways, the most obvious being illustrating the idea of resilience or perseverance with the loss of a parent or guardian. However, in a more general sense, it's the idea that whatever guides us in our lives, whether that be the magical force of parents, guardians, loved ones, teachers, caretakers, and so on, will not be around forever. This struggle is clearly seen in Miss Brisby, who first loses her husband and then Nicodemus, her guide through this journey. While these themes are adult, it's clear that they can be significant for developing children. The Secret of Nim draws a correlation between the struggles of humans and the struggles of rats, humanizing the animals and telling a story of loss, but also empathy to children. As we stray further into the 80s, we also stray further into the darkness of children's fantasy, with Disney's notorious flop, The Black Cauldron. Releasing in 1985, The Black Cauldron is an adaptation of children's fantasy books, The Chronicles of Bredane by Lloyd Alexander, in which a young and eager child, Taryn, attempts to stop an evil horned king from finding the Black Cauldron, a relic that the king can use to summon an infinite army of undead monsters. A lot has been said about this film and its history at Disney, as being in production limbo for years, with an original release date of 1980. Much more grim and sinister than Disney's animated productions before it, its dark and scary tone, lack of recognizable characters or a strong IP, and production issues made this movie a flop before it had even released, making just under half its budget. However, with its dark aesthetic riddled with skulls, demons, and swords, it's gained a somewhat of a cult following from fans who have grown up to appreciate film's aesthetic choices. While the film honestly doesn't have a very strong story or characters like others we will look at, anxiety and death are certainly at the forefront of its drama. The protagonist Taryn is being guided on his journey to stop the Horned King by a telekinetic pig, and later, a young woman, a foolish old man, and some creature named Gurgi. The contrast between the colorful, ragtag group of underdogs against the embodiment of pure evil and his army is quite striking. When comparing the Horned King to previous Disney villains in the same era, the Horned King is much more sinister in design, essentially acting as a true devil incarnate. And this evil Horned King also represents the design and tone of the film, where The Black Cauldron is truly a dark fantasy movie. Almost every moment involving the Horned King contains images of dead people, creatures with sharp teeth or glowing eyes, and imagery looking evil in some form. What I find to be even more interesting is that, thanks to the work of some dedicated fans online, it's clear now that the version of the film that we got, which still had an unprecedented PG rating, is a censored and toned down version, with some sequences being animated but never in the film, and some left to never be fully animated. This version has multiple haunting scenes removed, such as a scene where a man is fully disintegrated. While this was never in the movie, I think it's an important note, as it shows where the filmmakers' heads were at during the process of the film. It's clear that from the outset, this film was towing the line of being a children's fantasy film, and the results are clear in the final product. However, amidst all these disturbing scenes of skeletons and zombies, perhaps the most disturbing scene is not the army of the dead being raised itself, but during that sequence. In this moment, the annoying and comic relief character Gurgi, who has followed along Taryn on this quest, decides that he must sacrifice himself and help save the others, and throw himself into the cauldron. Before he does this, he says,
Gurgi has no friends.
Gurgi! No! Don't jump! Wait! No! No!
What is most troubling about this moment is that besides the later confirmation that Gurgi is indeed dead, there's no follow-up to this moment. There's no lesson about how, for example, Gurgi did have people who loved and cared about him, that his life was worth something. It's the adding of this line right before the sacrifice that adds a whole other layer to this scene. This is a very intense subject to have in a children's movie, and while others have had similar scenes in which a character sacrifices himself, there's normally not a justification to do so. While this film could maybe have handled this moment with a bit more grace, I believe these ideas can open up a conversation or dialogue about these sensitive issues with children, which can have long-term positive benefits. Mental health awareness can be very important for children to understand, and having that tough conversation with children can help them to empathize with other people, or maybe even to be more aware if they have their own struggles in the future, or even if they're struggling now. This scene brings death and loss to the forefront of children's fantasy, which in some ways is more scary and haunting than the Horned King himself. As we continue to dive deeper into these dark and grim fantasy stories of the 80s, we leave behind the medium of animation and come into the live-action sphere. Here, we're met with another 1985 release and another flop from Disney, Return to Oz. I figured it would be like so much of the nostalgia-driven content we've been subjected to in recent years, especially from Disney. However, this is not the case. The film follows Dorothy, who's returned from Oz, her mind ablaze from wonders and magic she had witnessed there. Her aunt, believing this to be a sign of mental illness or hallucinations of some sort, decides to have a doctor administer electroshock therapy. Once again, the idea of mental health comes into play, because the first 20 minutes or so of this film revolve around the dialogue of children's mental health, specifically the lack of autonomy children have around their own mental health, especially at the turn of the 20th century. We see Dorothy strapped to a bed and headphones on her head, all during a dark and stormy night. Dorothy
This was a crazy, creepy movie. This one gave me a little bit of anxiety when I was a kid, I won't lie.
At this point, it's clear that Dorothy is again going to leave her oppressive and depressing reality and float back into magical Oz where dreams come true. However, this is not the case. When Dorothy returns to Oz, Oz is not the same. Oz is decrepit, in ruins, and most of all, haunting. Instead of being welcomed with open arms into Oz, everything wants to kill her. This is a stark contrast from what's expected of a reboot of an old franchise. While it's common for characters in these films to go back and visit old places and characters, only to find things are not the same, this film completely changes the essence of what Oz is. The original Oz acts as a sanctuary, but also an escape for Dorothy, where she can face down her anxieties and troubles. This Oz is not a sanctuary, but somewhere where she is an intruder. As the story progresses and Dorothy attempts to help the people of Oz, the story does not get much brighter, as she encounters a headless witch who keeps disembodied heads in a cabinet, and these absolutely traumatizing things.
Come here, sit down.
While she does eventually restore order back to Oz, the final battle sequence is dark and sinister as well, evoking images of hell and demons. There's a lot of analysis to be made here, but the main theme of interest I'd like to draw out is that of anxiety. The original Oz, as mentioned, acts as a place for Dorothy to help those that are lacking certain qualities, such as courage, a brain, a heart. However, in helping these characters, Dorothy is in turn helping herself to gain these qualities too, facing down the struggle she's having in the real world. When taking that idea and applying it to Return to Oz, we get a grim sense of the headspace of Dorothy, who feels like since returning from Oz, all the magic in her life has been lost, and those that once guided her want to kill her, or at least destroy all that remains of her experience in Oz. In both films, by having empathy for others and helping those around them, Dorothy is able to overcome the odds in Oz and live a better life outside of it, which makes a poignant statement about overcoming challenges in life, such as mental health, relationship issues, grief, and loss. That is, that your own life is enhanced when you enhance the lives of others around you. These are very complicated themes that, while children may subconsciously understand, they may not draw out on their own. On a broader scale, the idea of a deteriorating Oz can be made even more dark when drawing a comparison between it and children of a certain age, more so, children of Dorothy's age, right on the cusp of early years of becoming a teenager. It's possible to compare a child's life from when they start making memories until right before being a teenager to Oz. Everything is so light and full of wonder, and everything is new. Everything you know wants to protect you, and you feel safe. However, as you get older, you start to slowly understand that this is not true, that the world's a dangerous place, and nothing will ever be how it was. This is when Oz begins to crumble and deteriorate around you, and if you let yourself, you can fall into the trap of teenage angst, depression, and this deterioration. In that way, the horrors in this film replicate these intense horrors that children feel at this age. All the while, the grim aesthetic carries itself through the entire film. At this age, children should really leave that self-centered view.
I'm telling you, we had the best movies in the 80's. I don't think we've covered it yet. Let's see. Okay, so he didn't even cover. The Never-Ending Story. And one of the biggest pieces of trauma in 80's film is when we lose Artax, in the swamps of sadness. Everyone who watched that movie when they were young died a little bit that day. Just facts.
And transition into an empathetic one. And by doing that, it's possible to take that positivity and emotion from Oz into adulthood. Considering the dark tone and this film's commitment to horrific imagery throughout, it's no surprise that children were turned away from this and traumatized by this film. However, with the anxiety of growing up at the forefront, this film is a very
That's
real
Perusa Bulk right there.
And these dark themes,
from The Craft,
soundtrack,
and Waterboy, and tons of other stuff. She's very, 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 very talented.
Created in the 80s by Jim Henson and his team.
I mean, she's known for playing those intense characters, but she's been busy.
In 1986, Jim Henson's Labyrinth was released. The film follows a very common idea
Another
in children's
formative
media, especially
film
in the realm of fantasy, which
in
is
our
that a young
childhood.
person escapes their grim reality and is transported to a magical world in which they must adapt and try to find a way home. Like Return to Oz, Labyrinth is live action, which has another tactile element to some of the...
You know what's weird? You could make the case that this whole movie is taking place on a rainy ass fucking night where like her brother has like gone temporarily missing, or something like that, and she is just in her room having a psychotic break, or like an episode like where she is just fucking, she's losing it, and and by the end of it, she calms down and she realizes that her brother is somewhere, safe, and like she, you know what I'm saying? Like you could just make the case that this is all taking place inside the mind of a teenager. None of this was real. She was just staring at around her room, trying to figure out what the fuck she was gonna do if she couldn't find her little brother by the time her parents came home from I think it was the theater or a movie or dinner or something like that. And she's just fucking losing it. I mean, or it was a combination of all of this, and there was some spooky Goblin King shit going on, but it could just been right up in here, right here. And Toby's off somewhere in the fucking house, just absolutely fucking having the time of his life, playing with a magic marker in the wall.
Horrific images seen throughout the film, such as the fiery dance and the creature that invades Sarah's room. The film is disturbing in its own right, but much like Return to Oz, the feature of a human helps to ground the viewer. Labyrinth is an example of what are generally
all those things in the film.
Jim Henson fantasy
They're all on her wall,
can be.
in her
However,
bedroom,
This is not the film I want to talk about.
around her room.
What if Henson's team were to dive headfirst into dark fantasy, creating a whole world, creatures, and lore? What if this film had themes of evil and a disturbing and grim aesthetic at its forefront? Well, that movie does exist, and it was created 4 years before Labyrinth.
Yeah, true.
The Dark Crystal is a result of Jim Henson's love for fantasy and world building, combined with his creative mind to break away from the Muppets to create something entirely different. While Labyrinth is more similar to the Muppets in character design and overall tone, The Dark Crystal was more or less a complete detour from the work that Henson had done before. The film follows Jin, a creature called the Gelfling, supposedly the last of his kind, who much used the teachings of a mystic that raised him, trying to defeat the evil and corrupt Skeksis. The lore for this film is surprisingly very dense, and has only been developing further in recent years, with comics and a full Netflix series acting as a prequel to the film.
Yep.
This dense world building has, for many fans of the franchise, trumped the common criticism of the film's uninspired story. While I don't necessarily fully agree with this criticism, I do believe it's how the film creates this world, and how practical effects, visuals, and performances work together to create this truly disturbing and haunting place, to be the film's most developed quality, again, within a film marketed towards children. Like many films we've discussed, there's a correlation in The Dark Crystal between aesthetic and tone.
I keep telling you, though, like, it's better for children to learn these concepts, or at least become aware of them and grapple with them in a context like this, where they can identify with the heroes, like the main characters, like the protagonists, and put themselves in their shoes, and then examine the situations that these protagonists are going through in here, and be like, well, oh gee, like that's a lot to think about. What would I do in this situation? And these kinds of concepts I mean, I know adults are aware, but like, these concepts, like the child's brain is like a sponge. So even if they don't publicly acknowledge like these concepts and these issues, that brain is still processing all of that. These movies, like the movies he's talking about, like they were formative for us for a reason. They were a bit traumatic for us for a reason, but like we owe it to these creators. We owe it to them because they tried to bring us honest to goodness entertainment wrapped around some really tough adult concepts, and that's good art. Like, I mean, it's not all art is, but that's really good art.
To a character's intentions or morality. This is why the Skeksis are seen in a dark castle, in which they eat grotesque meals, duel one another, and turn on each other. They abuse and prey on other creatures in the land of
Things like this make you the adult that you will become. Not everything, but it's a large part of it.
Prod, power of the crystal. It is this power that they use to maintain political control. This idea is very complex. However, what is not as complex is how the film uses haunting imagery to illustrate this idea.
Puppetry skills was insane.
Many children of the 80s still remember today.
You're very lucky, slave. Only the Emperor can.
I'm gonna have to go and purchase Mad God because I wanna
Although the world of the
review
Dark
that
Crystal
movie.
may be complicated, children can understand that the
I do
Skeksis
wanna
are
buy
evil by
it.
the way
I
they
actually
torture
wanna
and brand
purchase
innocent
that film.
creatures, along with the grim aesthetic attributed to them. While not all types of creatures in the film are as haunting as the Skeksis, there are very few characters who have that typical
That guy.
quality to them, with big eyes and a loving or
I have a cat like that. I've had a cat like
Hence it
that.
commits to this world
She
of
since
firelight,
passed away.
which is the film's biggest barrier of enjoyment.
Same colors
Love
and
the world,
everything.
character design, puppets, and aesthetic that hence it's created. You can feel immersed in the
She
story.
even had the same
You find the world to be
needles
too
in
off-putting
her
or
mouth
disturbing. There's no escaping
until
that
she got
film.
old
No
and
human or
like
comic
started to
relief
break
character
down.
will pull you out. Introducing children to a tactile, live-action
I
world
miss
in which
her.
there's no human to ground them can be disturbing, especially to very young children who struggle to separate this reality. Much like other films we've looked at, the mature themes and tone of the film guide the film's story. Both death and anxiety rear their heads in this film as well, perhaps in different ways than the other films. Death and loss are present with this ongoing trend we see in fantasy films of the 80s, in which a character loses the guiding force in their life and has to try to move on without them. In this case, Jen and the mystic who raised her.
Tirafina.
Along with this
That was
loss,
her name.
the threat of loss exists in the Skeksis' mission to rule Thra entirely, losing the essence of what Thra is forever. There's also the rampant abuse and tyranny of the Skeksis, which creates an atmosphere of deterioration and evil lurking around corners, adding to the anxiety of the film. So while not as overt as some of the others we've looked at, The Dark Crystal is still ripe with dark themes that are at the core of the film's story. While the imagery alone can traumatize younger children, perhaps the idea, which will scare older children, is the idea that the political structures that exist often gain and remain in power through exploiting the weak and vulnerable, such as the way the Skeksis use the podlings to literally drain the podlings' power for their own. As children are leaving Oz, they begin to understand that corruption is rampant in the world, which is a very challenging realization for many children, and which is channeled through films such as this one. While all the films we've looked at today do a great job in world building, creating a tone and aesthetic, it's the dedication and talent of Henson and his team to make a truly immersive and dense world. If it's not obvious, The Dark Crystal is a personal favorite of mine, and you can probably expect a specific video about it in the future. Often, when we look back on our memories of the things we watched as children, we don't necessarily remember the story of what we watched, but how it made us feel. And when you watch The Dark Crystal, you may not like the world it creates, you may be disturbed, you may justifiably critique its narrative elements, but the world being created certainly evokes a feeling of wonder, but also a looming evil.
Yes, sir.
I am not a child psychologist, nor do I have any data to prove anything about any of the movies mentioned in this video or their impact on the audiences that watch them. All I do have is the experience of being a child, and the things that scared me, made me happy, made me laugh, or spoke to me. While there's no way to prove these films did inspire children to think about death or struggles with mental health or empathy for other living things, or how hard it is to grow up, if
They
you
helped.
reflect on your personal experiences, It's hard not to believe that this is the case. We do know that media is influential on children in one way or another, which
You
is
should
why
sit
there's been
down and
many
watch
attempts throughout
these
history
films with
to
your
control
children.
what children can and cannot engage with. As mentioned at the
'Cause
beginning of this video, as we move forward
they're
through
the
internet
concepts
era,
that
I believe reflecting on these dark films as another level
I mean,
of
lawmakers
appreciation
want to
for the
like
ways in
take
which
these
filmmakers
books
had
out
to
of your
maneuver and toe the line of serious
libraries.
topics that they believed were important to their fantasy
It's a sad
world
fact.
and important for children to be exposed to. And besides haunting
Not
children
necessarily
with
these
nightmares,
films, but
I
the
truly
concepts
believe, while I have no
that these
evidence to
movies
prove so,
cover,
that
that
the dark
books
fantasy of the
cover,
80s helped children
the
understand
hard
experience of
concepts
real life a little
like
bit
that
more.
children need to.
Regardless of audience,
They need to
the biggest
learn. They
proof
need
that
to
these dark
know.
fantasy films
Like,
are
you can't
significant
hide
is
shit
the staying
from
power that
children.
these
It
films have
doesn't
today,
fucking
as they
work
receiving
out
a cult
ever.
following. Even the flops have been evaluated and appreciated.
Have you ever? I'm talking to the parents here. Have you ever, like? It didn't even have to be a fucking big lie, but you told like a fairly significant in their eyes, and now things are just fucking different. It's one of those things. If you have the opportunity as a parent, or as like somebody, like even if you're just like someone in a child's life, if you have the opportunity to steer them in the right direction, or at least give them the information to go and learn on their own, because like kids are, they're it's better that they learn to find stuff out by themselves. It's not always safe, but like life is never safe. But they need to learn, and it's better that you at least give them an introduction to them, and give them a grasp on it. Give them your take on it. Just don't lie to them. Don't hide it from them. That shit just, it turns out very badly. Very, very badly.
Appreciated with time in a different context. Perhaps being subjected to themes of anxiety and death as children is not necessarily a bad thing. At the very least, perhaps children could feel some sense of comfort in knowing that these feelings and experiences are universal. It's clear that the children's fantasy in the 80s was dark, it was terrifying, but also, it was pure magic. Thanks for listening.
Yes, sir.
Take it easy.
All right. And now we're gonna look at Wayfinder. It's yeah. I've somebody told. I think my buddy Darren, my cousin Darren, actually told me about this a while back. And we're gonna go ahead and check this out. It's a fairly lengthy one, but I mean, content is content, and like, I'd rather get it from a good source, and I'd rather give him the traffic. Make sure you subscribe. Always subscribe if you're going to consume and use somebody's content for your content. It's just it's good manners. And I can't do links in my description yet for some, like, I don't know, whatever, however YouTube does things. So that's why I put them up on the menu, like tonight's activities, so that people can see where to find these videos. And also I do make sure that you can see the headings and titles and their channel and everything, so they do get exposure. I'm a consumer. I've been consuming content forever, and like, reciprocate. I appreciate the work that these people do, and I want to bring that to you guys too, because you don't see everything. Like, there's so much shit that comes out on YouTube that like, you might never see videos, and like, I want to bring you new stuff. So here we are, Wayfinder, and I'm going to do a dab real quick. while we
Gameplay
watch.
loop, grinding, character, and progression systems of Warframe. Combine that with some MMO-like open zone elements of, say, something like Destiny, and topped it all off with the visual stylings of games like WildStar, Fable, or World of Warcraft. Well, Wayfinder is what you would get, and that, more or less in an oversimplified nutshell, is exactly what this game is. Now, last week I got the chance to go hands-on with Wayfinder, playing roughly 25 hours of this upcoming action combat character-based MMO. And I've come away mostly impressed. Beyond a few notable issues with performance, concerns about the overall scope of the game, and a gameplay loop that likely won't resonate with everyone, you better like procedural dungeon grinding. Fortunately, I do, and thanks to a really well executed
I'm okay with
combat
procedural
system
dungeons.
that feels fun to play, along with what looks to be thus far some great encounter variety and design, I've enjoyed just about every minute of my time with Wayfinder. In fact, I found that the more I kept playing the game, the more I was enjoying it and wanted to just keep on playing, which is a really good sign in my book, as I tend to feel so many games start to lose their luster around the 15 to 20 hour mark, but I have come away just enjoying the game more and more. So today I want to talk with you about Wayfinder. I want to talk about its structure, the various systems and mechanics, what there is to do in the game, like what you can expect in any given session, and then also go over some of what I think they are doing right and what could use some improvement based on my time with it so far. First of all, let's briefly touch on this genre thing. So they are calling Wayfinder an MMO, and it is an MMO in the same way some might consider Destiny or Warframe an MMO. Personally, I would classify this as a shared world game, or MMO Lite gets used sometimes as well. Don't come to Wayfinder thinking you're getting an experience similar to World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, or Guild Wars 2. It is not that kind of a game. Wayfinder isn't made up of like massive continents that are broken up into large zones that you can seamlessly explore with like tens or hundreds of other players potentially running around. No, its structure is a lot more like a smaller scale fantasy version of Destiny. Basically, the game is broken up into two main parts: the overland open zone areas, of which there are just a couple, and then the instanced dungeons where you are likely to be spending most of your time. In the open world, you will be seeing a handful of other players at a time. Dungeons will include groups of up to 3, and you'll see the highest concentration of other people, I think around like 20 or 30 maybe, in the game's major towns. But call it whatever you like, honestly, it doesn't really matter. I just kind of wanted to set expectations for what sort of a multiplayer shared world game Wayfinder is. And speaking of which, let's get into it. What is Wayfinder like? So things start out with you playing through a brief tutorial. You will pick a starting character, not class by the way. They are going with the Warframe route here, where you play as a pre-established character that has a set identity, a name, a personality, and then its own unique traits and skills. Much of what they're doing actually with the design and structure of this game aligns very much so with Warframe, which will become more evident as we go along here. So you pick a character, then you get introduced to the basics of movement and combat. This is an action combat game through and through, with everything you might expect it to have. There are light and heavy attacks, combos where you can chain or alternate between those, and then there's things like jumping and dashing attacks. There is blocking and dodging. Although it's not as deep of a melee combat system as, say, Souls games, with all of the attacks, combos, and then contextual variations that those have, Wayfinder does at least cover most of the basics, and the combat in general, it all feels really good. So after the tutorial, you are brought into the first major town. This is called Skylight. This is where you're going to pick up a lot of your main and side quests, along with having access to a bunch of different vendors, as well as crafting stations. We'll get into that stuff later, but I just want to say outright how much I was like immediately impressed with the appearance of this game. Visually, the town's look and design reminds me of a combination of World of Warcraft and WildStar. The buildings and the setting have this real strong Nordic vibe, along with everything being ridiculously oversized, that really reminded me of WoW's Wrath of the Lich King expansion in particular. Like, it all feels very reminiscent of various areas and towns within the Howling Fjord specifically, and I just absolutely love it. But then there's also this like mix of the fun funky sci-fi tech of WildStar in parts of the city, like in the crafting station areas. You've got all these neon signs and flashing lights, kind of like funky looking. I don't know. I just think this game looks real good aesthetically. I know it might be a little cartoonish for some people, but I personally find it very appealing, and I definitely think it is one of Wayfinder's strong suits. On several occasions while playing the game, I would just go, damn, this all looks real good. So when you first arrive in town, the game takes you through on a series of quests, walking you through the different major areas, introducing you to the NPCs and stations, and then you go on a brief romp through your very first Lost Zone mini dungeon. You clear a few rooms, fight back a large wave of enemies, finish the dungeon, and then they set you off into the first open zone area. So let's talk a little bit about the open world in Wayfinder. All throughout your time playing this game, you will regularly be directed to these open zones, either through a main story quest, some side mission that you pick up, or just because there are things that you want to do or farm in these areas. I would say that the open areas are decently sized and fully open to seamlessly explore once you initially load in. The open zone that you were first introduced to is called the Highlands, and it's basically like this fantasy woodlands area. So what things are there to do in the open world? Well, you'll go around exploring different points of interest. There's lots of really cool bespoke areas to see here. There's things like the Pit and the Crossroads Foundry, the Bloodworks, Ironstone Keep, Lower Skylights, a lot of highlights, a lot of areas
in order to keep some kind of fucking
all throughout you will of course come across
up.
plenty of enemies to fight. You're going to see things like goblins and bandits. There are mutants and various elementals, as well as wildlife like bears and deer and things along those lines. And every single enemy has a set level. So when you first start out, there'll be some safe spots for you to explore where everything is around your level, but then you will come across places that are too dangerous because the enemies are way stronger than you. Now, as you play, you level up, you get stronger, and then all of a sudden those low-level enemies can be dealt with in 1 or 2 hits, and then you naturally progress to being able to access the higher-level areas. But yes, it does appear like there is no scaling of enemies within the open zone area. There are public events to do scattered all throughout. There will be small ones, like you'll come across these locked chests that can only be opened once you kill all of the enemies surrounding it, and those enemies will also have chains wrapped around them, which I thought was a neat little touch. Then there are much larger difficult events, like say the summoning rituals, where you have to eliminate the summoner goblins and a few of their minions before a timer runs out. You'll also encounter these portals where creatures will spawn in
YouTube's
from
copyright bots are having a little bit of trouble going through one of my uploads because it's a bunch of new movie trailers, so they've got to go through and make sure that everything is fucking up to snuff. It's funny.
That are found in the world. Also, some objects found in the world will grant you side quests, and these ask you to do the typical RPG side questing fare: collect some items, eliminate targets, gather resources. There are also a variety of collectibles and resources to pick up, so you'll find ore nodes scattered all around. You hit these, they automatically vacuum up. There will be chests that have loot in them. Some of these will be obvious, others are hidden or even buried. Like you'll find locations where there's some rubble and debris on the ground, and then by interacting with it, the chest will reveal, or sometimes enemies will spawn in instead. And then also there are these memory fragments. These are these glowing yellow orbs. You'll find these all over the place, both in the open world and in dungeons, and they're used for a lot of the game's progression systems, specifically for unlocking new weapon masteries, for crafting new wayfinders, and then for upgrading your echoes, which are kind of like the game's version of gems. So when I first got into the Highlands, I actually had the impression that it was kind of a small space. Like as I first ventured out and pulling up the map, it seemed like a relatively tiny area compared to a typical MMO open world zone. But I gotta say, as I spent more time playing and exploring, I have come to find that it's all rather dense. I think this is largely due to their use of layering the environment. Like this isn't just some flat terrain for you to walk over. There are multiple levels to the entire thing. So you'll find castles and ruins, towers, hills, and rocky formations that tend to expand upwards. And then there will be tunnels, caves, and low valleys
so
that
the environment's
go low,
like
even in some cases underneath parts of the map. And then lots of paths and interconnected access points between all of this. There will be lots of spots where you're actually required to do some sort of navigation on your part in order to get through. There'll be like jumping puzzles to get up to or across an area, or you'll have to use some of the game's
Atomic Heart has some challenging jump puzzles, and like I really like. You'll see when we get back into game, but I'm having a real good time with Atomic Heart.
various traversal tools that are in the environment, which include things like zipline locations, various ladders, and even elevators. Now, I wouldn't call these open zones massive though. In fact, just out of curiosity, I wanted to test how long it took to get from one point to the other. So I ran from the tippity top of the map where you first spawn in at the elevator all the way down to the southernmost point, and it clocked in at roughly 5 minutes, which even included some checking the map and getting lost briefly and having to wait for my stamina to regenerate. So the total surface area here, not exactly huge, but I will say it is designed and layered in a way that does make it feel pretty dense and interesting to explore. Also, you wouldn't ever really just run straight from one end to the other. There's no reason to. It doesn't make sense. There's no purpose behind it. Usually when you're in the open world, you are there to do something, be that farming enemies, collecting orbs, participating in events, or doing any of your main or side quests.
That's
so just
right,
running
Bobby's
across
gotta work
the map
tonight.
is something you'll never actually want or need to do, especially since the game has fast travel locations, these signal fires that once you unlock, you can just instantly teleport to between the zone with no loading screens. Now remember, they did go as far as to make the distinction and call this game an MMO, and as such, you will be running into other players. You'll see them engaged in combat with a pack of enemies, traversing the environment, collecting orbs, or doing any of the public events or side quests of their own, all of which, by the way, you can join up with them at any given time. The game does look to incentivize team play by having instance drops, like just being next to someone who kills an enemy or opens a chest would actually drop loot for me to collect as well, so there's no sense of competition when it comes to fighting enemies and engaging with the open world stuff. Now, in terms of how many players you're going to see in the world, well, I'll tell you, the most I would ever come across at any one time, I think, was like 3 people. Although the entire zone does hold more than that, I've never actually seen large groups of players all in a single spot at any given time. They are there, but it's just you're going to occasionally run across them. There aren't really a lot of instances where they're all going to be gathered, most likely, unless you are specifically coordinating gathering with the people in your particular instance. All in all, I will say I do feel like they've done a fairly solid job in executing their version of this open shared world. These areas do feel pretty enjoyable to explore. Unfortunately, there's only 2 of them. Like I said, the zone that you are initially introduced to is called the Highlands. Now, after progressing through several hours of the story quest, along with doing a bit of grinding and leveling up, you will eventually be brought to the second zone called Reaver's Woods. This is like this snow-swept region. It is an entirely new area filled with all new things to do, new landscapes to explore, enemies to fight, and resources to collect. But from what I understand, these 2 zones are the only 2 zones that the game is planning to launch with into early access. And if that is true, I do feel like that is far too few. I would have guessed or hoped for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 zones, if not 10 or 15. But the idea that they're releasing with only 2, I think may very well leave some people feeling like there's not enough open world content. Now, at the same time, none of that may matter because the open zones, you are not going to be spending a majority of your time there. Most of your time, I would guess somewhere between 70 and 80% will be in the Lost Zones. Now, these are instanced, procedurally structured dungeons that you will be running over and over and over again for the sake of gathering resources, currencies, and the game's loot. Like mentioned earlier, after the tutorial, you are brought through a brief, roughly 5-minute dungeon run. The main quest giver, called Omen, asks you to step into your first Lost Zone at the Gloom Gate, which is this massive, like, dimensional portal sitting just on the edge of town. So you spawn into these ruins and are asked to find the Codex Ember. You make your way from one hallway to the next with rooms connected in between, fighting back goblins and spiders, opening chests, and collecting resources along the way. And then there is this giant purple barrier you break through with your dagger, which opens up access to some more hallways and rooms full of enemies. You keep on going until you reach the final room, which is like this wide open arena. There, a large group of enemies spawn in and an ambush. Defeating them lets you open up the Gloom Anchor, where you collect your bonus rewards, complete the dungeon, and zone out. Now, structurally, this is the basic experience of running a dungeon. It, of course, gets much more varied in layout and appearance, and there is a wide variety of different side objectives, hazards, and puzzles for you to solve, but the general flow is the same. Zone in, move through the dungeon, navigating hallways, rooms, and some bespoke areas here and there, all placed and laid out in a procedural fashion until you finally make your way to this final room where you fight back an ambush or a boss, and then the dungeon is complete. Now, to help keep things fresh though, the game has multiple zones or locations or tile sets, if you want to call it, where these dungeons take place, and this adds a lot of variety to how the dungeons look, to the things that you'll encounter, and even the enemies that you will fight. This isn't just a coat of paint either. Each dungeon location is rather distinct in not only its appearance but also the structure and layout and design of the rooms that you move through. So after that initial mini dungeon, you're brought out into the open world and you have to complete a few tasks, and then you're asked to find the entrance to what's called the Codex Halls. Now, this is an actual physical location in the Highlands open zone, so you'll have to go there in order to gain access. You'll make your way over, maybe you'll do some of the open world activities that we talked about earlier while en route, and then once you arrive, you go through, you complete the dungeon, at which point the Codex Halls then becomes available as a new option to open up and run from within town at that big portal called the Gloom Anchor, and that is how the sort of main story progression is tied into the dungeon farming in this game. There will be various steps in between some of the main story quests, but essentially once you reach a dungeon and then clear it in the main story quest, that dungeon and that kind of tile set is then unlocked back in town, at which point you can just keep running it over and over and over again, and it'll all be slightly different each time thanks to how this whole procedural placement of rooms works. Which, if you're wondering, structurally it's more or less like a variation in the combination of rooms and then the connecting pieces. So you'll have hallways that lead into a small room maybe, and then maybe that small room has multiple hallways branching off of it in different directions. So you go down one hallway and then maybe there's a big room that has multiple levels. There could be some stuff in between that, maybe some side quest or boss or groups of enemies to fight, but then that big room also has some hallways branching off of it. Or maybe it doesn't, and then you head back in the other direction, you go down some other hallways, and maybe you find a room with a puzzle, and then maybe you have to go back to the main area, or maybe that puzzle room now has a branching path leading you further and deeper into the dungeon, and then maybe you come across a little event, and maybe you find a room with a side quest and NPCs. There's so many possibilities because they just basically take this entire collection of rooms within each one of the dungeon locations, and they just piece them together differently every time you run through the dungeon. I think the best way to think of it is that every dungeon location has a set number of building blocks, and then how they're connected and laid out will change from one run to the next. You will not always be seeing the exact same rooms every single run, but yes, it is the case that as the more you play and say you keep running the Codex Halls over and over and over again, you're going to keep seeing the same room types. They will just be presented in a different fashion, but it will get repetitive because that is simply how this sort of procedural dungeon structure works in these kind of a game. But again, each dungeon location has its own separate building blocks. So in total, the build that I played had 9 base dungeon locations. The first one you unlocked was the Codex Halls. You kept on playing. Eventually you unlocked the Undercroft as well as the Repository. And then there were 3 separate mine locations, each which had a different layout and look to them. And there were 3 additional locations within the Reaver Woods, which is that second kind of snow-themed zones. So there are 9 dungeon stylings, more or less, each with their own distinct bespoke layout and presentation and enemies and things and puzzles to do within them, which all combined together does add a lot of variety. And there's a lot of other things to keep things fresh and mix it up further. So everything that I've been describing thus far would fall under the category of an expedition. But on top of that, every dungeon location also has hunts that you can go on, which are basically like single room boss fights. You'll have to craft a special key every time you want to go on a hunt, and then that key unlocks access to a fight of that particular associated boss. Then on top of that, there is the difficulty scaling. So whenever you complete successfully a dungeon run, you unlock the next tier of difficulty for that dungeon. So you start off at level 1. If you do that successfully, you unlock level 2, which will scale everything up to be tankier and deal more damage. With each one of these levels, there is an associated recommended gear score, basically, and this keeps on progressing forward. I personally saw as much as 5 difficulty tiers for the dungeons, although there may be more. I'm just unsure. I simply didn't progress that far in the time that I played. Now, on top of that, there is also this imbuement imbue system, and this adds another layer of difficulty by enhancing enemies in the dungeons with affixes. So for example, the shadow imbuement will make it so that every enemy that dies will then blow up after a few seconds. Now there are multiple elemental imbuement types, and each one of these will do something different. Adding an imbuement to your run, of course, makes everything harder because of the affix and the enhanced enemies, but then also gives you better rewards. And eventually, as you progress, you will unlock the ability to apply multiple imbuments to a single run, which also, as it turns out, is a good way to farm for unlocking the various pieces required to craft new Wayfinders, because you start the game with one and you have to make the rest very similar to how it works in Warframe. I will say, while there is absolutely a lot of repetition to the process of running dungeons, since it is a large part of what you're going to be doing and what you will likely be spending most of your time for progressing your character as well as progressing your weapons, and you will be seeing the same areas over and over again, coming across the same rooms, the same hallways, the same path types, run after run after run. I do feel like the way they do procedural placement really does help mix things up and keep it varied. That, in conjunction with the fact that they've got these 9 different dungeon locations, and I assume, and as far as we know, they will be adding more of these kind of tile sets of these dungeon locations between now and release. An average dungeon run would take me somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 15 minutes, and just so you know, if you want to get a general idea for like what the flow is of any particular play session, personally I found that it looked like this. I would log in and probably run a dungeon like 2 to 3 times, and then maybe I would go on a couple of boss hunts, and then after that I would head out into the open world. I would do some side quests and events, I'd collect some things, and then I'd take all of the stuff that I gathered in that process and I would use it to level up my character, power up my gear, and start the loop over again, just continuously progressing and getting more and more powerful, leveling and getting stronger as I keep doing this loop over and over and over. Speaking of which, let's dive into the talk about how characters work, how the customization is, and the game's various progression systems. So as mentioned earlier, in Wayfinder, you are playing as a character. These are not classes like a lot of MMOs do. It is way more akin to how Warframe's frames work. Every single character has a name, they have a backstory, and they come with 4 default abilities along with a few passives. And all of these things, while they can be modified, they never completely change. Your character is your character. Your 4 default abilities are your 4 default abilities. So the game will be launching with 6 characters or Wayfinders in total. There is Wingrave, who is kind of the tank and healer hybrid. Silo, who throws a variety of bombs and can summon decoys. Nis is like a rogue character with a lot of dash attacks, dealing shadow damage. Senja is the brawler or gladiator with melee punches and grapple hooks. And then there's Kairos, the war mage, with a variety of ranged and spell attacks. The game is also launching with a 6th Wayfinder, but that has as of yet not been revealed. I think the rumor is that it is going to be another healer, potentially. The character that you first select when going through the tutorial, that is the one that you will be playing for the foreseeable future. They are pretty upfront with this. They give you like a big warning after you play through the tutorial and before you finalize your decision, saying, hey, this is the character that you are going to be stuck with for the time being. Because yes, if like me, you pick Wingrave, but then decide you want to play Nis, for example, you're going to have to do some grinding, because all additional characters beyond the first one you select have to be crafted. Now, crafting characters involves basically grinding for these rare materials to create 3 memories of the Wayfinder that you're wanting to play. You combine that with a little bit of gold, and that is how you unlock every additional Wayfinder beyond your first. Now, it is expected that this is going to be a bit of a grind, or very likely that you will be able to purchase the Wayfinders, because this game is free to play, and they have been pretty upfront with the fact that they're going to be modeling the monetization after Warframe, and Warframe is a similar game where you start off with one, and then everything beyond that has to be crafted, which will take some time and be a grind. Or you can choose to purchase it, which is the other option. We are assuming it is going to be exactly the same here. I will just say, in the 25 hours that I played, I was unable to craft another Wayfinder. Now, to be fair, I wasn't particularly aiming for that. I wasn't grinding specifically to unlock a particular one, but just in my casual play, I was nowhere near having the the resources to craft a single additional Wayfinder. Now, the Wayfinder you pick is only one part of the equation though, because then there is the weapon system. So at the moment, there are 4 weapon types or classes in the game. There are the sword and shield, 2-handed melee weapons, 2-handed ranged weapons, and then dual daggers. So every character will start out using their signature weapon. So for me on Wingrave, I automatically had the one-handed sword and shield. Now weapons, beyond having their own particular types of attacks and combos, they also come with their own ability. So my starter sword and shield was called the Vanguard, and its ability was Power Bash, where basically I could do a shield bash for massive impact damage and guard break damage. In combat, I would build up charges, and then the more charges I have, the harder hitting it was. But what's interesting is that is just one version of the sword and shield weapon type. There are others in the game, and every single one of them come with their own unique skill. So in the build that we played for the different weapon classes, there were
I gotta
4
remember to use my
variations of the
abilities
sword
and
and shield,
motherfucking,
2 variations of 2-handed melee
Atomic
weapons, 5 ranged weapons, and 3 variations of the dual daggers. Every one of these variations has their own unique ability, so your weapons that you use aren't only like that, like sword and shield attack combos and lights and heavies, but also, depending on the one that you use, will give you a completely different 5th skill for your character. Now, they have said that this list will be expanded upon with time. I do believe by the time we get early access release, there should be even more than the ones that we saw in the build that I played. And what's even more interesting, though, is that while your character does start off with one particular weapon type, you can use any weapon in the game. Like halfway through my playtime on Wingrave, I decided to swap into using 2-handed melee weapons. So I still had my 4 base abilities, they stayed the same, and I now had access to a completely new light and heavy attack chain combo, as well as all of the different attack variations, like the jumping attack and the dodging attack. But then I also had a brand new 5th ability. So the 2-handed axe that I was using was called Typhoon. It's a heavy hitting weapon, deals high damage to health and resilience, and then it has this different passive system where engaging in combat builds momentum, adding additional damage to the attacks that I do. And its ability was called Shatter, where I would then consume all of my momentum and perform the strong overhead slam, and if I land a direct hit, that would sunder the target, causing them to take increased damage for 10 seconds. So the weapon system, it cannot be understated how it is almost like the other half of your character. Yes, your 4 abilities will never change for the character that you play, but there is some distinguishing of your playstyle and your build as we go into the other parts of progression.
Okay.
But combat changes drastically once you switch your weapons, because while I started with a sword and shield, I swapped to a 2-handed axe. I could then also, if I wanted to, try the 2-handed sword that's in the game, or I could try one of the 5 ranged weapons, or I could switch and try one of the 3 dual daggers. And if they can stay on top and continuously add not only new versions of these 4 weapon classes, but I want to see more weapon classes, because there's so much more than swords and shields, 2-handed melee, ranged, and dual daggers that they could go with. I mean, in particular, off the top of my head, where's the caster stuff? Where are the stabs and the wands? Like, that opens up a whole new range of possibilities, and it is really exciting, the potential here if they continue to expand on the system, but even just with the system that they currently have in place. Now, there's much more progression in the form of accessories, echoes, the affinity system, and the abilities and masteries, so let's dive into that. So first up, you've got accessories. This is essentially your gear slots in the game. You will not be finding helms and chest pieces and pants. Your Wayfinder,
I wonder if
appearance is mostly cosmetic,
Wayfinder is
besides
in
changing
beta.
out your weapon. But the gear comes
I mean,
from
obviously
these
it's in some
accessories.
kind
They're
of,
basically relics that you find. They'll drop
beta.
from enemies. You'll find them in chests, but then you can also craft them. Basically, they're like stat sticks. It is a pretty straightforward system. They will have levels and come in various rarities. You will equip the best version and the highest level relic that you have that also has the particular stats that you are looking to enhance. Now, beyond the fact that every relic has a stat boost to it, they will also come in sets. So if you have 2 or 3 of these set accessories, then you get the bonuses associated with that. In addition to this, there is the Echo system. This is basically like
Wayfinder
gems.
beta.
You will
There we
collect
go.
these, and they provide stat boost, increasing your health, weapon, and ability damage, things like crit or other offensive and defensive stats. There are also classes of Echoes that will add an ability modifier. So some modifiers include, if you use your weapon ability, you can then drop a bomb that deals magic and break damage. Or if you lose half of your guard break, all of a sudden it summons a damage shield equal to 25% of your health. Or there was one that I found where any melee combo finishers, which is just basically the end of an attack chain, campaign. Once
Oh,
you reach
so the
that,
next
it
beta
then
is not
summons a
until
large
May.
AoE blast. And these are just
Okay.
3 examples of this class of echoes that will modify your attacks or your abilities or give you some sort of passive enhancement. I assume
Okay.
there are way more beyond the 3 that I've
Says
seen.
sign up
So
for the
these
beta
echoes will
on
be slotted
Steam,
onto your
so
character,
let's
but
go to
also into your
Steam.
weapon and the accessories that you have. And each one of those character, weapon, and accessories will have an echo capacity. So the echoes themselves will have a type and rarity and level, and then also an associated cost. And the system works very similar to Warframe, where you try to match the echo type to the proper slot on your character, weapon, or accessories. And if you do so, that will actually cut its cost in half, which then lets you fit more and more powerful echoes in. It's just a matching game, which gives you access to more potential capacity to put more or stronger echoes on your character. And then outside of whatever condition echoes are found when they drop for you, they can then further be upgraded by feeding other echoes into them, which increases their star rating, which increases their power. The other form of power progression comes through this system of affinity. Basically, there are 3 lines of affinity that you can progress down. There is instinct, discipline, and focus. Now, this progression can be done for both your character and the weapon that you're using. Each one of these categories will just enhance a particular combination of stats. So your basic stats include your max health, resilience, weapon and ability power, crit rating and power, break power, and then physical and magic defense. So depending on the character, the accessories, and the weapon that you're using, the particular combination of stats that you get from going down the instinct, discipline, and focus trees may change. At the bottom is another form of power progression, where you move through this, leveling it up and spending resources, which makes you stronger in whatever attributes you're looking to enhance. On top of this, there are perks that you will unlock as you progress further down each individual path, and these provide some further specialization by giving you a passive boost, enhancing your character. Now, as I talked about earlier, the abilities that you get for your characters are static. You know, every single Wingrave has the 4 same abilities, for example. Those are locked in and they never change. However, as you level up your character, you are granted points to enhance those abilities, but there's no choice here. There's no like branching tree. Basically, every ability has 3 tiers of upgrades, and then as you upgrade it, it just makes it stronger, giving it you know, additional percentage damage or healing or whatever, just making it better. It is a pretty bare bones system, and I'm actually a little disappointed that they haven't expanded further upon it. I don't know why there aren't at least like 8 options. Like, if we can only have 4 active skills, at least have like multiple variations of those. If nothing else, what I would love to see, so that you take the 4 base abilities of my Wingrave, and then once I level it up, give it a branching path where I can change and pick from 1 of 2 options. Or maybe I keep the original core option, so maybe every ability has 3 potential variations, the core and then two alternates, that then turns out to be 12 potential skills that players can choose from. But right now, if I'm Wingrave, I have 4 abilities. It's the same 4 abilities as every other Wingrave, except maybe theirs are just modified differently than mine. It's pretty bare bones, and honestly, something that I think needs to be improved. I'm astonished that this is what they're going with, but it is what it is. And then finally, for power progression, there's the mastery.
I mean, you got to
system.
start
So your
somewhere.
character is going to start out with the mastery of your weapon class. Like my Wingrave had the sword and shield mastery, but you can then unlock the other weapon class masteries by spending some memory fragments, and those were those yellow glowing orbs scattered around the game that I talked about earlier. It does look from this build like they intend at some point to add a mastery perk system, but right now nothing's in the game. That is probably just coming later in development. So that is the power progression. Now you might be wondering, well, how does visual progression work? Well, there is none, is basically how it works, or doesn't work. From what I saw, the visual appearance of your character is entirely 100% cosmetic. Like, if I wanted my character's look to change, I would have to change the weapon that I'm using, or go into the cosmetic tab and swap things around. Now, in the build that I was playing, I don't know if I had access to like a collector's edition variation of the game, I couldn't tell you, but I did have a few options to start, so I was able to change up to my appearance. At no point did I ever find or unlock any new cosmetics to swap on my character. There was no changing of my visual appearance unless I stepped into the customization tab, or like I said, unless I swapped the weapon that I was using, and I found that pretty darn disappointing. I mean, I do wish that they went with a traditional gear system for the game's power progression, because then that would give the variation of gear swapping out and changing as you find new pieces. But no, that is not what they've gone with, and the visual changes do appear to be 100% cosmetic. I am, of course, hoping that by the time the game comes out, there will be cosmetics for you to unlock while playing, and it is not entirely tied to monetization. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but also it's a free-to-play game, so maybe cosmetics only change by buying new skins. I don't know yet, but in the build that I played, I never found a new cosmetic besides the ones that I started with. So there you go. Which brings us into discussion of monetization. Now, in the build that we played, there was no monetization to be seen. There was no cash shop, not even like a work in progress coming soon tab, but it is absolutely going to be there at release. Of course it is, because this is a free-to-play game, and they have explicitly said they're going to be modeling it after what Warframe does. So what is that? Well, if you're not familiar, a lot of Warframe's progression actually centers around the use of these kind of long build timers. So you'll need to construct various parts for your weapons or the frames that you want to build, and those will come with a build time. For the higher value stuff, for the better stuff, sometimes that build time can be very, very long, many hours. I mean, it's been a long time since I played, but I recall build times of over a day potentially. So you can wait that time, or by spending a little in-game currency, they let you pay real money to skip those wait timers. Now, I should say, from what I saw, there were no timers for the building, for the crafting systems in this game, but that could change because they have said they're going to be modeling after Warframe. So it's certainly possible. Now, other things that Warframe has available for sale in the cash shop include, of course, there are cosmetic skins, there are the characters or the Warframes themselves, there are weapons that you can buy, you can purchase various equipment and boosters, enhancing boosters, percentage boosters, XP boosters, currency boosters, and there are also companions available for sale. Now, because Wayfinder has said this, here's the exact quote actually, they stated that the game will be, quote, embracing the free and fair digital extremes monetization philosophy. Now, in terms of Wayfinder, like I mentioned, I didn't see any build timers, but at the same time, I also couldn't find a cash shop, not even a tentative spot for the cash shop. It will be there though. At the very least, if nothing else, they will be selling skins. And like I said, the built-in cosmetic customization and progression was pretty much non-existent from what I saw. We'll have to see where all of this lands once the game officially comes out. Now, as for my overall impressions, I really like the game. And like I said, I really found that as I kept playing more, I was enjoying the game more and more, and I wanted to keep on playing. On the good side, I think the gameplay and combat in general feels really solid. I absolutely love the visuals, the design, the aesthetic, the way the world is built, the overworld area, how it's structured and how it is to explore, and even the progression system I thought felt pretty good, although I think it could use a little more variety. In particular, I would love to see more Wayfinder skill.
So that
as
one
for the
is
bad,
still,
well, unfortunately, performance was pretty
processing.
rough. I've got a pretty high-end
Well,
rig,
it's
and
not still
even
processing
I
it.
struggled to
There were some
maintain a
checks.
consistent frame rate. In the open world, the dungeons, it was much
Apparently,
smoother, but while I was in the open zone
Whitney
play space,
Houston
it was a
and
little
Wham
choppy. It was even worse
snuck
for
their
my
way
friend
into the
who has a
video,
2080, and he said he
they
would go
can't
down
be
into the
seen
teens,
or
like, as the
monetized,
drops
and I'm
were
okay
pretty
with that.
substantial, and it was almost
I think
unplayable
it
for him.
was
So
during
whatever this is, hopefully they can
the
iron out performance before release. I also want to say that
the
lots
trailer
of the world
for
felt a little
Deadpool 3.
stiff. This is a preview build, so there were things like T-posing NPCs and characters that kind of just felt like plopped in place. Obviously, the T-posing is going to be swapped out, but I do hope that they can add some more animation to the environment and the NPCs within it, because I did feel like a lot of it felt static, almost like I was walking through a diorama instead of like a living world. So I feel like they should do something to breathe a little more life into the game and just make it feel a little more alive. That would go a long way. I also really hope that they launch with more than just 2 open world zones. I hope I am misunderstanding or was misinformed, and that they will be releasing with like 4 or 5. If not, I feel like some people are going to feel it's just not enough, and there's not enough to this game, even with the fact that you are spending most of your time in the dungeons. It would be a shame if that is going to drag the game down. But overall though, yeah, I really like this game. I had a lot of fun, and I think it's got a ton of potential.
Where it goes.
So when are we going to be able to play it? They are looking to go into early access at some point in May. There will be patience between now and then, and the game is slated for a full release later in this calendar year. Now remember, it is a free-to-play game, and with that they are going to have not only a cash shop, but also a season system. So they said the seasons will be released every 3 months, and with each season, they will be including a brand new Wayfinder, brand new weapons, as well as new open world events and dungeon challenges. Now, I do believe that they will occasionally with these seasons also be introducing new zones and new dungeon templates, or those dungeon locations that we talked about, but that is not going to be coming with every season. They have not said as much. It's not expected. I think Wayfinder is really cool. I really had a good time with it. I'm looking forward to playing more. It's definitely not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and it is a traditional MMO if we still want to argue about the genre classification of this game. But in my experience, it is nevertheless a fun loot game. It is a fun grinding game. If they can make performance, if they can work on more combat variety, please, for the love of God, make it so that we don't just have those 4 skills. Make branching paths. If you can, whatever. I'm not a game developer, but man, it seems like a shame that there's 4 abilities that never change for our Wayfinders. Yeah, whatever. We're supposed to play different Wayfinders. I get it. What if I don't want to play different Wayfinders? Well, then the game's not for me. Anyways, that's it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. It is very long, but I hope it was informative and helpful.
It was informative.
For you.
Thank you very much.
Wayfinder. Can't wait to play. I'll see you guys later. Take it easy. Thanks for watching.
All right. So that was Wayfinder. So I'm going to